Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, Miss.
Okay, good morning. Today we have a special guest lecture. Here is Dr. Philip X. Fuchs, Assistant Professor from National Taiwan Normal University. And he is part of our lecture in UNES, but with the online. Maybe hopefully one day will be offline in person be with you. And Assistant Professor Dr. Philip X. Fuchs, this is already have maybe 3 years already, right? With UNES. 3 years, so
Good,
long.
good morning. Yes.
Good morning. 3 years with us. So is having sharing his knowledge uh, regarding the scientific research or maybe about methodology research. Please welcome Dr. Philip X. Fox. Your times. Now is your time.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and good morning, and thank you for having me. Quick start from my side before we begin. Because I prepared both topics, should we focus today on scientific writing only or methodology and writing?
Mm, you can do what? But the methodology in scientific writing.
Mhm. Okay, good. Then we start right here with the
Mm-hmm.
scientific writing. And a short introduction about who I am and what I did. So you know a little bit about me. My name is Philipp Fuchs. I am from Germany, but moved quite early on to Austria, where I did my sports science studies, my bachelor, my master's degree. Also studied a little bit philosophy during the bachelor and master's in sports. And then I pursued a PhD in sports science in Austria. Around 2018, I also did a second PhD in engineering, which was in Italy. So I was sometimes traveling a little bit back and forth, but it was more blocked events in Italy, so I was still living in Austria. In the meanwhile, I was working at the university as a research assistant first, then a project researcher, then later I had my, or we had a quite a big European Union project which I coordinated. So all these things allowed me to collect a lot of international experiences because we were working with many different countries. And then in 2021, I came to Taiwan for a postdoc for 2 years, and afterwards I got a professorship offered here. So that's what I am where I am right now, and my topics are basically in biomechanics, in training science a little bit. Um, my two PhDs have been basically in biomechanics and movement analysis, the first one, and the second one in equipment validation and method statistics for validation purposes. So these are a little bit my main topics across different sports, leading to a number of publications, journal publications, and well as conference contributions. And during this entire process, of course, you learn a lot about writing and writing skills. I had a mentor from the States who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but he was a massive help and taught me a lot about how to write stuff and so on. So I'm very happy to share some of the information and some of the things I have learned about it with you today in a very short session, but there is much more to learn, but hopefully it can help also you a little bit. My main sport interests and activities are martial arts, or Chinese Kung Fu in particular, or anything that is applicable or practical in self-defense situations. And on the other hand, outdoor activities. Mountains. I used to live very, very close to the mountains in Austria. This picture on the bottom right is, in fact, the mountain very near my home where I could reach the beginning of this trail within 40 minutes by bicycle from my home. Very, very beautiful area. Okay, so this just about me. And now for the session, we focus on how do we write a scientific article. So in particular, it's about scientific writing, not generally writing. It depends, of course, on the piece of work that you want to write, that you want to generate. It is very different for newspapers, of course. It is very different for novels, for poems, and so on. We talk about scientific writing. There are different rules. They are quite strict, different demands and requirements. It's also not the same as academic writing. I would say that scientific writing is one particular style within the family of academic writing. Academic writing could also be if you are in an academic position, like the job you're working, but in a company, and you write reports or something like this. And this will be different at a more detailed level than scientific writing. Scientific writing is writing your thesis. In the case of students, that is probably where you will need it. Or later on, if any one of you is pursuing such a scientific career, of course, writing all sorts of manuscripts for conferences, for journals, for third-party funds, funding applications, and so on. Usually how scientific works are structured in most fields, and more or less, there may be some deviations, but the principal idea very often is to start with an introduction. The introduction provides all the necessary background information, explains why a topic is relevant, what sub-disciplines of a topic are relevant, and they lead to research questions, to hypotheses. And basically, the goal of your research is to answer these questions. So the introduction is a little bit like the basis, the fundament on which you build everything you do in your study then. So once the introduction has clarified the background and the research questions, you describe the methods which contain everything you did. So first you say, this is what my topic is about, and I want to do this. I want to investigate this. I have the following research questions. And then you describe what you do in order to answer this question. What kind of tests do you run? What participants do you investigate? What protocols do you use? How do you use the equipment? How do you collect data? How do you process data? How do you analyze data? All these things, everything you do. So then, logically making sense, what follows after describing what you did is to describe what you got. Those will be the results then. Results are very plain, only the facts, no assessment, no interpretations, just the pure numbers or text, like as quotes, very plain and factual. With all these facts, you don't have interpretation yet, so the next step is to make interpretations. This is coming in the discussion section. So in the discussion section, you discuss, you interpret, you explain, you put into context all these facts, all the reported observations from the results section. This is what the discussion section is doing. And then finally, if you have interpreted, if you have explained, if you understand observations in context with previous studies, in context with references, then you know, you identified what you found in your study, and these findings will help you to explain then what this means for conclusions. What conclusions can you draw from this? What does this mean, in summary, for other researchers? What does it mean for other practitioners? What does it mean in the future? What outlook does it provide? This in a very brief, very often only one paragraph, you explain in the conclusion. So you see, you have in scientific works, you have a very clear and stringent, very strict structure from one chapter to the next one, and there is meaning on purpose why you need to follow this structure. This is what I explained, the macro level, where we take a step back and we look at the entire thing. It's not very detailed. It's the big picture of your study. Introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusions. We want clarity and a stringent structure also at other levels. At the meso level, when we go into a single chapter, like into the introduction or the methods and so on, or even the micro structure, where it's about all the single details of every single sentence and so on. So stringency, clarity, strict structure is helpful for us to make things easier and easier to understand, and we need it at all different levels. Okay, so macro level concerns relates to the different chapters. Meso level addresses the different paragraphs. So the sequence of paragraphs should also follow a stringent logical structure. In order to check this, we can take a text and we can paraphrase each paragraph. And paraphrasing would mean that we read one paragraph and we try to identify what is the big picture of this single paragraph. What is the key message of this paragraph? And paraphrasing means that we turn this paragraph into a single phrase. A short one, which could be like a headline. A headline, a short description of the paragraph. And to see whether this structure is clear and if the meaning, the purpose of each paragraph is distinguishable, you should check if the single sentences in this paragraph align with the paraphrases of the paragraph. So imagine you read one paragraph, you replace it by one single paraphrases, a headline, what this paragraph is about, but then you read the first sentence, and the first sentence has nothing to do with your paraphrases, with the key message of the paragraph. Or you read, and the third sentence talks about something different that does not relate with the paragraph. That would tell you there is something wrong in how this chapter is split into different paragraphs, and maybe this piece of information in the paragraph should be moved to another paragraph where you actually talk about these things. So this is the way how you can check it if you are dealing with a text that is already written. And if you start writing, we will see later on, very soon, in detail how this works. But we do basically the same thing, just in the opposite direction. We start with paraphrasing, which is then called outlining. In a moment, more about this. So this is the meso level, dealing with the single paragraphs within a chapter. And then the micro level is the single sentences, or also how you transition from one sentence to the next one. So this is then the detailed, most nuanced level, where we will also talk about how to phrase, how to word. So this a little bit about the theory and the concept of different levels where to pay attention. Now the question is how to do these things. To achieve a stringent logical structure, it is very important. Many people will tell you this, and it's also my opinion, so I strongly recommend to not do this approach of think and write. Do not think about stuff and you are working in your head, collecting ideas, and then you start immediately writing your text aligned with your thinking. So you think, how should I start? This is important. And you start writing sentences down as you think. This will make it very difficult to have a clear structure because in the process of thinking, you didn't structure everything from bottom to top, from the beginning to end, perfectly through. The thinking is part of making the plan. And then later on, you may rearrange, but then you already worded everything, phrased it, wrote it down in sentences. So it is easy to lose track and get lost in all the details. What I think is the better approach is to start at the macro level, to make a plan, make a concept, how to structure the macro level. Usually you don't need to think about this too much because the macro level, as I said, most of the time is introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusion. So from this point, you jump into meso level then, and you think how to structure each of these chapters, how to structure the introduction section, what aspects in the introduction about this topic are important, a health aspect, a performance aspect, how different components relate to each other, what previous research found out about it. So make a general structure, how to arrange paragraphs within your chapter. This would be a concept. You conceptualize your chapters. This is a process of thinking, but you don't go into too much detail yet. You just outline the general concept for this chapter. And then if you have a general concept, a general idea what components are important in this chapter, then you add more specific details. Oh, what about the health aspect is so important? What about the performance aspect is so important? Add one specific detail, one after another. And when you have collected all the details and you rearrange them, in what sequence does it make sense to mention them, or what sequence is the easiest to understand, then you write down full phrases. Then it's the actual writing process. And that means that during this conceptualization process and during specifying stuff, that you rethink, you get new ideas. Maybe sometimes you also need to read the literature again, looking for specific information. And this new information gives you new ideas. So you think about stuff in a new way. So during this process, you may change some aspects, you may change priorities. All these things lead to rearranging, like the sequence, how you will plan to later on write stuff may change. And as long as you have a concept and work with the keynotes instead of full phrases, it's easy for you because you visually see it in front of you, if you have a concept like this on paper, to rearrange these ideas. So only in the end, when you have an overview in the form of keywords of what is important and a structure by how it's arranged, then you start writing. This is, I think, a good approach to make sure that your work is structured in a meaningful way. So let's see how to rearrange or how to sequence stuff. at the meso level. So we are still talking about the paragraphs. We go into the chapter. How do we arrange paragraphs? What do we start with? And the very general rule is that you start broad with general information, and then you narrow information down and you get more and more specific. This can look in this can address different characteristics. In general, I would say you always start with the fundamentals, with the most important and crucial things. This is usually very general. So general to specific is the one way. You can also go from easy to difficult. And what I mean is not easy or difficult for you to describe it, but for the reader to understand it. So it's usually better to start with something that is easy to understand for the reader and then explain more difficult stuff later on, instead of starting with what is difficult and you lose the attention of the reader. Similar to this idea, you can start from something that is familiar and then later on move to something that is new, that is unorthodox, that is innovative, and so on. For the same reason, because the familiar things, and I'm again talking about what is familiar for the reader, not for yourself, because the familiar things are easier to understand. So start at the point where it's easy to understand, where people know something about it, and then you move to the new things, to the more specific ones, to the special, more complex things that are harder to grasp. A little bit in contrast, and this does not apply to all paragraphs or to all chapters, is you can also write your stuff in the same timeline as they happened. And this makes most of the time sense for the method section, for example, that you write down the single steps in the same timeline as you implemented them. But this principle does very often not apply so much to introduction section, to discussion section, and conclusion, because there it doesn't make sense to write stuff down in the timeline as how you thought about them. You need to cluster the thoughts that they are coherent and represent or describe one part of the topic. It doesn't matter the sequence, when you thought about these things, right? But in terms of methods, it makes a lot of sense to first, of course, start with the data collection and then with data processing. To first describe what the athletes did and then what was the outcome of whatever they did. Or after data processing, describing how you analyze the data. So then in the end, going into the statistics. So these are a little bit the principles or the key ideas to follow in order to build a structure within paragraphs, from general to specific. Outlining is the key word to achieve such structure. And I would recommend and suggest that we take a short break where everyone, I copied this link in the comments, so you can copy paste this link, watch this video. It's less than 2 minutes, so it is very concise, and you take a look. It is very informative, and then when you have an idea of how outlining looks like, then we continue and I provide you an example of what I wrote and how the single steps looked like when earlier this year, I prepared a short manuscript for a conference. And I show you how the outlining looked like. So let me share this link with you. And then you just follow the link, you watch the video, 1 minute 40 or something. We take a let's take 5 minutes for it so everyone has time to open and to rewatch if you didn't understand something, and then we move on. So we move on at 10:30 in 4 minutes. Okay, good. I hope you all finished the video, and I think I hope it was helpful. I think it is very insightful and very short. I could not describe it better in a shorter amount of time. So you saw that outlining is like using keywords to reflect ideas. And by using the keywords instead of writing a full sentence, it's much easier to have an overview. And with this overview, it is much easier to create a clear structure, how to arrange these ideas. So it doesn't mean that in the beginning you already identified a good or proper structure. You just collect ideas, you describe them through your keywords or single paraphrases, and then you rearrange them. You may also identify when you see this overview, I actually forgot about something. There is another important information that I should add. If you have this overview, you can more easily identify at what location to add this new piece of information. So I hope that this makes sense and that you don't see outlining as an unnecessary additional work. It will, for most people, massively contribute to deriving a better, more stringent structure in your text. The other thing why I think it's a good idea to outline is because it is really easy to start. And if you start, on the other hand, on a blank paper with nothing on it, and now your job is to write your thesis, or even if you break it down to write a section, like to write the introduction section, it easily feels a little bit overwhelming or not so clear how to start, where to go. Like it's a big task compared to just writing an outline, just thinking and having keywords. You can do this within 5 or 10 minutes. I'm pretty sure if we right now, I don't know what is your current state in your study program, but if you, let's say, already have found a supervisor and your topic for your thesis, so you know what you will work about, maybe you have read a little bit literature about it, um, and you could sit down and in 10 minutes we can see an outline for your background information, like of your study, the introduction section. Maybe depending on how much you read about these things and thought about these things, it will not be very detailed. Maybe depending on the amount of information that you have, you will lack or miss a lot of information that is actually relevant. But everyone can start with an outline. And from there on, you can proceed, you can improve, you can add more information, better information, and so on. So it's an easy strategy to start the writing process. Let's jump to the example I want to share. So this is the method section that I wrote for the ISBS conference this year, where you need to submit a 4-page manuscript. So for a conference quite long. And they wanted, I believe, to have an introduction, methods, results, and discussion. I don't remember if discussion and conclusion but even if there was a conclusion, it would be very short. So more or less, you can say a little bit less than 1 page per section. That means 1 page or 70% of a page for the method section, like this. First step, defining the single sub-chapters within the methods chapter is straightforward and relatively easy because this At this level, the structure is very general, and you can apply the structure to many studies, especially within one field. So I mentioned earlier, I'm working in biomechanics, and most biomechanical studies will follow such a structure within the methods section. If you're working in a different field in sports science, not in biomechanics, but sports psychology, management, philosophy, whatsoever, these details may vary, but in general, the approach is the same. And very often, as long as you work empirically, you will also collect data from a sample. You will use some sort of, like you will follow a procedure for sure. Only the tools will change. Maybe you don't work with equipment in the form of like technical devices, but you will use scripts or you will use software and so on. So in biomechanics, the structure describing the sample first, because these are the people you are working with, you collect the data. So this is the first thing where you start. Then you describe what you did with them or what they did, the procedure, the protocol. Then you would describe the equipment or all sorts of tools that you used during this procedure. And then after this procedure was implemented with all this equipment, the equipment collected some sort of data, right? So at this stage, you then finalized data collection, and then you jump into data processing, data handling, including what kind of variables were calculated, how you filtered data, how you ran calculations, and so on. So you get the final data that you then can statistically analyze. So as I mentioned earlier, this way of structuring refers more to the timeline of how things happened, how you implemented stuff. And it makes sense to follow a similar timeline here. Easy for the reader to understand what was done and to participate in this process. So that would be the most general level within the chapter of methods. And then what I do is to think about each of these single keywords, the headline, like sample, procedure, equipment, variable, statistics, to think what kind of specific information do I have that is relevant for the study, to replicate the study. So I describe each of these single parts, I add information. So I think about the sample, how many participants did we have? What were their characteristics? What characteristics have been important in context of this particular study? I recommend to add power analysis that is justifying the sample size. And in the end, you usually should provide information about ethics. Then similar to for the procedure and the protocol, I was thinking, well, what have I been doing with them? What have they done, the participants? We did a warm-up, and then they were sprinting for 60 meters. That's it. Nothing else. Then I was thinking about the equipment. What did I use? Well, I used only two things. I used a number of force platforms. They covered 50 meters of the sprint. And I used timing gates to measure the time at 30 meter and 60 meter. That's it. Again, not very detailed, just thinking about what equipment did I use. Then for the variables and calculations, there was more here, but I needed to make a list of the variables first. So for example, I measured or calculated step length, step frequency, contact time, and flight time. There were more that in my outline, I listed all of them. I didn't add them here in the list because it's not so relevant for you. So there were braking forces, braking impulse, propulsive force, and so on. A number of spatiotemporal characteristics, but I would list all of them. And then the last subchapter was statistics. Well, first of all, what software do you use to run the statistics? Then for the tests I wanted to conduct, or I needed to conduct to answer my research questions from the introduction section, I needed to test some conditions first. So first condition in testing, if I know what conditions are met and which ones are not met, then I can choose the appropriate statistical tests based on the results of the condition testing. Conditions would be something like normal distribution. And then once the statistical tests are conducted, I need to say, what do I report about them? Effect sizes, alpha level, statistical outcomes, whatever it may be for your type of statistics. So then I have more information about the single subchapters, like sample, procedure, equipment, variables, and statistics. And then I have an idea what kind of information to include there. I still did not add all the specific information, but I just used the keywords to know what kind of information I need there. And then the next and final step, it's a big jump now coming, is to think about all these things, how many, characteristics, power analysis, ethics. What information do I need to provide there? And this is how it looks for the entire section then. Focus on the first part first, like the first paragraph. So all this is regarding the sample. Going back, the sample should cover how many, the characteristics, power analysis, and ethics. So let's take a look first. I was thinking I need to describe how many. Well, there is not much to say about how many. It's a simple one number, right? 17. So this is quickly done. But the next part, characteristics, is a big thing. What kind of characteristics and what have they actually been? So describing the characteristics, it is important to know that they were males, what is the competition level of them? They were competitive sprinters, describing their activity. Then what else do I have? Everything that is here in the brackets, their age, their body height, the body mass, their personal best performance to better reflect their skill level, their competition level. So all these information describe the characteristics of my sample. Then we had the power analysis next. So I'm thinking about, okay, what kind of information do I need to provide regarding power level and what is the outcome of it? So I described, okay, I had a power analysis. It was what kind of analysis? A priori power analysis. What were the benchmarks I was looking for? I wanted to have 80% power, detecting at a desired statistical level. What kind of effects? This was the outcome. We were able, at this power, at this significance level, to detect this kind of effect size. So that is the information I need to provide about power level, including the outcome. And for your information, that would be a moderate effect. So what this means is that at what is standard in the field, to have an 80% chance to detect a moderate effect at a significance level of 0.05 was met. However, not at the threshold, the lower threshold of moderate effects, but something in between moderate to large effects. Since this is a priori power analysis, I would describe this within the sample. This is usually used to identify whether the sample size is suitable and sufficient or not. So I would report this in the sample within the method section. If it is post hoc power analysis, then you do it after your data collection, then I would include it in the results section. Then it is a result section of what you did. Now, then the last thing within the sample paragraph was the ethics. So again, ask yourself, what kind of information do you need to provide regarding the ethics? Well, they had no injuries and they signed written context. We followed the Declaration of Helsinki, and all this was approved by our local IRB committee. I think that is all the information needed to cover the ethics. That means we covered the sample, and we can continue with the procedure, where I have specified so far only that we had a warm-up and we were doing sprinting. So again, what information do I need to provide about warm-up? What kind of information do I need to provide about the sprinting? So let's see warm-up first. We had a general warm-up and we had a sprint-specific warm-up. Good. They did this obviously before the sprinting, so the sequence is also clear. First talk about the warm-up, then about the sprinting. What kind of information did I need to provide about sprinting? I needed to provide that they actually did 3 sprints. How long was the sprint? Why did they do 3 different sprints? Because they have been in different conditions. Once barefoot, once using regular shoes, once using sprint spiked shoes. Well, if they do it 3 times, I need to describe the sequence, how they did it. They did it in randomized order. So not barefoot, short, spiked, but randomized. Maybe it was barefoot, short, spiked. Maybe another one was doing short, barefoot, spiked. Another one was doing spiked, barefoot, short, and so on. But it is important to describe that it was randomized. Otherwise, you could have a systematic effect due to the sequencing. So this was not the case here. Then how long was the break between the sprints? I need to specify this. And when did it take place? Different sprints at different days? No, all at one day. I could, in fact, also provide here also already the information how long the break was. I don't remember why I didn't do it at this stage, because it is nothing you need to think about, or it's nothing that is making things more complicated. Maybe I didn't have this information at this time when I wrote the outline, because I was collaborating with a friend in Japan. He collected the data. So maybe at this time when I wrote the outline, I just noticed, oh, it is really important to describe how long was the break, but I didn't know it yet, and I will need to ask him for the information. But if we clarify all this information, then it is everything that we need in order to describe the procedure and protocol. So next step, equipment. I said 2 kinds of equipments, force plates and timing gates. What do I need to provide about the force plates? How many it was? The company and brand. The sampling frequency, very important. Where have these force plates been used? At the starting position, throughout the remaining 50 meters of the sprint track. What did they do? They obtained 3D ground reaction forces. And we also obtained the point of force application. Then the same thing for the timing gate. Similar, like before here, I didn't have the information at this time, but I knew, of course, it would be important to say what is the equipment, the name, the company, the city, the country. In this case, we don't have measurement frequency. We just get one value, the time for what? 30-meter and 60-meter mark. So less information about the timing gates than about the force platform, but everything that we need to know, everything that affects the results. And by the way, everything that someone else needs to replicate the study. So with this information that I provide in the method section, someone else should be able to replicate the same study. Then let's take a look again. I outlined to describe the variables and calculations, and I listed what those have been. So need to go into detail for each single variable. Like I said, one was step length. Then I need to describe how did I define step length. Another one was step frequency. I need to define what was the step frequency. And then we can move on, do this for every single variable. What is the variable? What is the definition? Same if the definition was a little bit more difficult or calculations have been not self-explaining, then you need to describe how things were calculated. And then the final step was the statistic subchapter. Clarifying the software. So I need to specify which software did I use, what conditioning testing, what statistical tests, and so on. So let's see. Statistics, what software was used, Excel, software, SPSS. Data was presented as mean and standard deviations and 95% confidence interval. Then we get into the conditioning conditions. Which two conditions were relevant? Normality and sphericity. These two, the only ones that mattered for my analysis. Good, specified. Move on to the next thing, which was statistical testing. So which did I use? MANOVA, repeated measures for the conditions, for certain clusters of variables. So in the variable list here, you may be able to detect that some variables are spatiotemporal and some are kinetic. So I could run a clustered MANOVA for spatiotemporal effects and a MANOVA for kinetic effects. At this time, this was an idea. I haven't defined yet if using these clusters, and I didn't define yet whether this make actual sense or not, because running additional MANOVA for single clusters makes things a little bit difficult if the sample is limited. And I didn't know at this time if with 17 participants it actually makes sense or if the study would be underpowered for this. But it was an idea. It would make sense to start with the MANOVA and then go into detail into single ANOVAs or postdocs and so on. So in terms of an outline, where I didn't make a final decision yet, I would write that down and I would note, okay, I work with a MANOVA, this is how I would do it. Then after the MANOVA, which is more general, again, from general to more specific, after the MANOVA, if there are effects, I would do an ANOVA to see where exactly within those clusters are the single effects. And then similar, like from ANOVA to ANOVA, from ANOVA to postdoc. If there are effects in the ANOVA, I would like to know between what conditions are these single effects. So I would run postdoc afterwards. Then I need to specify, how do I do the postdocs? Because I have options. Is it the t-test for normal data? Is it the Wilcoxon for non-normal data? So need to specify. That was this part. And then the final part about effects and what do I report. Of course, I need to specify what effects I report, partial eta square, coherence D. Depending on your test, I need to specify the desired statistical significance. So all these things together, you see, I thought about what information do I need to fill in this previous structure. So this is the previous structure. This contains now all the information, but none of this is like there are no full sentences. I didn't start the actual writing process yet, but I collected all the information that is relevant and I wrote them down as keywords. 17 male competitive sprinters, a priori power analysis, no injuries, written consent, Declaration of Helsinki. If there is more information than just a priori power analysis, you want to specify brackets and insert the information that provides more specific insight about this. But keep it at this level. Don't think about the writing. Don't think about how to word or English is not your native language and so on. All this comes later on. You can do this also in your mother tongue, of course. I could also do this in German. English is not my native language. But it's important to collect the information. And at this stage, it would still be easy within this structure to rearrange the specific information. So at this level, I can rearrange the structure. I could say, oh, well, maybe it's super important to clarify the ethics first and then describe how many subjects I had, for example. It's not like this in this case. So this is the structure that I thought makes sense. But during the process, when I created the structure, it may have looked differently. I don't even remember. This is just the outcome. So at this level, you can rearrange. You can move the procedure to the beginning or later on, or start with the equipment and so on. You can say you want to start for whatever reason, first describing the sprint and then the warm-up and so on. Easy to rearrange. Once you have this structure and you add the single specific information, you can rearrange. You maintain the structure, but you rearrange the specific information. Is it important to first start with the age or then with the sprint time? Is it important to start with the power level and then describing the effects and so on? Up to you, but easy to rearrange at this level. And once you have followed your general structure and also the sequencing of information within the structure makes sense, is easy to understand, then at this stage, once you receive this outcome, you start writing. And now you already see this is quite a lot of text, actually. Remember, for the ISBS, I said 4 pages, one section, less than 1 page, maybe around 70% of a page. This in a Word document is already about half a page. So there is not much more than just turning these keywords into full grammatically correct sentences. So then we jump into the micro level when we talk about how to build the sentences. And this is building sentences. This is about phrasing. So putting all this information into phrases. This is what we take a look at for the next part of the lecture. We finished the meso structure. We jump into the micro structure. Micro structure refers to sentences, how to build sentences. It refers to what is going within single sentences, but also beyond, like also how sentences are linked to each other. So at the micro level, we are talking about either a single sentence or the connection between 2 sentences, but not many sentences, not the entire paragraph anymore. That would be mesostructure. Let's start with the most fundamental thing about sentence structure in English language. The sentence structure in English is defined as you start with the subject, you follow with the verb, and then with the object. And then you have a full stop. I added this part for my Taiwanese students because they also use different punctuation, and literally sometimes they don't use a full stop at the end of what is grammatically sentence. So subject, verb, object. That is the structure. The subject is someone who is doing something actively, an active doer. The verb describes the action, what is done, a verb of action. And the object can often be a recipient or a reference of the action. Like, what is done? Who is doing something? What is that thing that is done? What is the action? And what is done? This is the principal structure in English language of a sentence, and you try to keep it as simple as this. Don't make it overcomplicated. We will take a look into sentence structures. But on the other hand, so structure is the one thing. The other thing is style. Like when we write, when we phrase things, we have a certain style how we do this. There are different writing styles for different pieces of works, and as I said before, we are talking about scientific writing. And the most important thing about scientific writing is clarity, to be clear. And there are many, many different things how to achieve this. But clarity, on the one hand, is, I would say, the most important things, and then many other things like being precise, being simple and short, being concise, not having redundancy, using consistent terminology, don't use abbreviations too much when it's not necessary, using action words instead of nouns. All these things, they help improve clarity. And we will go into detail of many or all of these things. All these things contribute to clarity. And the goal is to be as clear as possible. Then there are other things, being objective. Being objective has nothing directly to do with clarity, I think, but it is very, very important in scientific writing. And similar, reader friendliness, although this reader friendliness relates to clarity. If something is very reader friendly, it usually should be clear and easy to understand. Objectiveness is important in scientific writing because in science we want to be objective, right? Not subjective. We want to deliver knowledge that applies not only to you or it's your opinion, but it applies to the world. It should describe the world objectively. So your writing style should also be objective and not emotional and not manipulative. In many other types of writing, you can be emotional, or sometimes you should even be emotional. Like imagine you read a novel, a fantasy book, and there is nothing emotional going on, and someone is just very rationally, objectively describing actions that are going on. It's not very engaging. Now, we could talk about how emotional news or something like this should be. But very often from a strategical point of view, from the people who are delivering the news, they want to be emotional because it is more engaging and people are more interested and more moved and touched by it. Whether that's a good thing or not, or whether it should be or not, is a different discussion. But there can be writings where you want to be emotional, definitely not in scientific writing. And the same about being manipulative. If you write text for commercials, advertisements, and so on, your boss may want you to be manipulative in the way how you write. 100% not, of course, in scientific writing. Reader friendliness can also be increased by the variations in sentence length and structure. Imagine you write the text and you follow a stringent structure for each sentence, and it is very clear, it is short, and every sentence is following the same structure, same length. That is super clear, that is easy to understand, but it's a little bit boring to read. And now the thing is, I think that is only a secondary interest to make it more interesting. The primary interest should always be to be clear. So change sentence structure and sentence length only if it doesn't negatively affect clarity. Keep clarity at the maximum, and within this, introduce some variety in sentence length and structure. Biggest part and what we talk most today for the rest of the session is clarity and all these rules and things that you can do to maximize clarity. One very important thing affecting clarity but also for your general phrasing. And like the one rule that you will encounter very often and hear very often is KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. KISS, the KISS principle means to remove everything that is unnecessary or redundant. Redundant means repetition. There is no need to say things twice. You want to keep a scientific article or your thesis. Well, actually, for a thesis, it's a little bit different. So let me explain first how it usually is for scientific articles. You want to keep them short and simple, not repeating, not a waste of many unnecessary words. For a thesis, it may sometimes or often be a little bit different because the purpose of a thesis is a different one. In a scientific article, you write it for a target group, which is other researchers. You don't need to explain them everything. You don't need to show them your skill or your knowledge. And that is the difference for a thesis. A thesis is a work that you do and you get evaluated for it. So the supervisor must understand if you actually understand what you write about, and he must assess, evaluate your knowledge. So for a thesis, there is this tendency to write a little bit more than what is necessary, and to, I don't want to say show off, but to show that you understand what you are what you're writing about. So theses are a little bit longer, but in general, don't write unnecessarily long. Don't write redundant stuff, repeating the same information over and over again. And this refers to entire paragraphs, but also, of course, sentences and single words. For paragraphs, it means don't write something about a topic in a paragraph, then you continue with other things, and then 3, 4 paragraphs later on, you write about the same stuff again from a different perspective, maybe. That is redundancy. The entire paragraph may be redundant. For sentences, the same thing, of course, and even for single words deliver an idea. Don't deliver the same idea twice by using 2, 3 words. We will see how this looks like and what we can do about it. Then, very important, use as few words as required while maintaining a structure that is as simple as possible. As long as you deliver the desired message accurately and clearly. So your primary goal and focus is to deliver a message. This message should be accurate, correct, and clear, easy to understand. As long as you deliver this message in this way, make it as simple as possible and use as few words as needed to deliver this message. So this way you don't waste a lot of space. Less space for the same information. That makes your text concise, more dense. That means you can always ask yourself, can I simplify or shorten this phrase? So if you wrote a text, check for every single sentence, can I simplify or shorten this phrase? Is there any way to make it more simple? Is there any way to make it shorter? That should not be your primary goal, because as I said, your primary goal should be clarity and correctness, like deliver the message accurately and clearly, but then check, can I do it in a more simple or shorter way? One very simple case that almost always applies is, and that is at a very detailed level, dealing with single words, is this expression of in order to, which is almost always unnecessary, and you can just replace it by to. I collected data in order to find something out. You can just say, I collected data to find something out. I did a study to learn something. Is shorter than I did a study in order to learn something. So this is like one example where you need to understand nothing, and you can always apply it. Just remove in order. Makes it shorter. This is the kind of writing style that we would want to emphasize in scientific writing. Key message here on this slide: always keep it simple, stupid, no matter how you want, how you can achieve it. And we will see many different ways how we can achieve it. One way how to achieve a more simple structure is to focus on action. And there is this method called paramedic method, where we focus on action and on the user, on the person or thing that is acting. In this method, when we have a sentence, when we wrote down any sentence, people recommend to circle the prepositions we have and to draw a box about is verb forms, because they are very often indications of not very efficient writing. So down there in the example you see it would be in, off, in, off would be these prepositions, and is the verb. It is not a word that is stressing action very much, right? It's not a strong action word. So ask yourself, this is now the step 3, and I think the step 3, 4, 5 are the really important ones. Ask, where is the action? Is the action actually in the verb? Is? No. Is not an action. In this sentence, in this paragraph, is a demonstration of the use of good style in the writing of a report. The action is actually the demonstration. Something is demonstrated. Demonstrating is an action. So the action in this sentence is the demonstration. That's the action in the sentence. If you read this sentence, I read it out again. In this paragraph is a demonstration of the use of good style in writing of a report. Maybe you also find it a little bit difficult to understand what is the message, what is the meaning of this phrase. It's a little bit complicated and not very straightforward. So the first part is we identified where is the action. The action is a demonstration. The second part is then to change the action into a simple verb. So now our verb, the grammatical, like the verb in our sentence was is, but the action is demonstration. So what is the verb for demonstration? It's to demonstrate. So instead of saying something is a demonstration, we want to simplify it by saying something demonstrates. It's shorter. 3 words versus 1 word. And if something is shorter, it's easier to understand. Something is a demonstration. It's harder to understand than something demonstrates. Now the question is, what is actually demonstrating? So that's the next step. Move the doer, the active doer, into the subject. Make the thing or the person that is doing the action, make this also become the subject, the grammatical subject in your sentence. For example, who is kicking whom? Who is punching whom? I'm very much into martial arts, so I'm thinking about kicking and punching. So who is doing the action? In this case, who is doing this demonstration? Who is demonstrating? The paragraph is demonstrating something. So instead of saying in this paragraph is a demonstration, or in this paragraph there is a demonstration, you can say the paragraph demonstrates. Much shorter, much easier to understand what it actually means. Straightforward, saying who is doing what kind of action. And then eliminate all unnecessary slow wind-ups, like in my opinion, eliminate all redundancies. The rest here is saying directly what is demonstrated, not a demonstration of good use or use of good style in where it is, but saying demonstrating good style. What does it demonstrate? It demonstrates a good style in report writing, a good writing style in generating reports. say directly what is demonstrated. Compare, in this paragraph, there is a demonstration with this paragraph demonstrates. And compare a demonstration of the use of good style in writing of a report. Compare this with demonstrates good style in reports, or demonstrates good style in report writing, or demonstrates good writing style for reports. Much easier, straightforward. So two things: focus on the action, identify the action, make the verb become the actual action. And second, use the subject, the grammatical subject in your sentence as the person or the thing that is also doing the action. If we focus on action and we use action verbs, that means we use action verbs instead of nominalization. Nominalization is quite popular. You will read it very often in, for example, other academic writing, because it sounds more formal, it sounds smart, and official. So many times, if you read official documents or academic reports and so on, you will find a lot of nominalizations, like demonstration. And in scientific writing, this is not desired because they are harder to understand. And you want, as I said, to make it clear, easy, and simple. So scientific writing is not about showing off. It's not about showing how smart you are. It's about having a topic that is complex and complicated on its own, even if the language is simple, and you want to use a simple language in order to facilitate understanding. We can see the effects of normalizations in this example. The first one uses normalization. It is harder to understand and it is much longer. The second example delivers the same message. It's much shorter and much easier to understand. I read out for you the difficult one with the normalizations. The committee came to an agreement to the effect that a study should be carried out by the consultants into the feasibility of the provision of national funding. A little bit complicated to understand what was actually done and what was meant by it. Compare this with the committee agreed that the consultants should study the feasibility of providing national. I cannot read the rest because there is a pop-up from the shared screen, but you can read it. National funding, blah, blah, blah. If I remember correctly, it's also covered. The second option is 14 words. The first option is 28 words, so exactly double the amount. So you see a huge effect on how long sentences are. Normalizations make sentences longer. And you hopefully also realize that the second option is much easier to understand than the first one. Coming to an agreement versus agreeing. And again, what is the verb? The verb is come, to come. But that is not the action. Coming is not delivering the message you want. The message is the agreement. People are agreeing. So take this one and turn this into the action verb. Make agreement to the verb. The committee agrees. Instead of the committee comes to an agreement. Same here. A study should be carried out by consultants. What is the action? The action is to study something. And who is doing it? The consultants. The consultants should study, not a study. A study is not doing the action, but the study is here the subject in the sentence. So take the active doer who is doing the action and make this one become the subject. In this example here, the study is the subject, but the study is not the thing that is doing something. It's the consultants doing the study. So again, a study should be carried out by the consultants versus consultants should study. Same message, much easier. Or the provision of national funding versus providing national funding. This is a normalization. This is using a verb. Okay, so don't use normalizations. Use instead action verbs. Some more examples how to simplify stuff, how to remove redundancy, and how to reduce the amount of unnecessary expressions that you use. Slow wind-ups are typical examples of unnecessary information. They are expressions that don't deliver valuable information. They are usually used in oral communication when you talk, when you have a conversation, and their purpose is to create space or time to give you time to think, to process for what you actually want to say. In written form, we don't need those slow wind-ups. We don't want any unnecessary use of words that is not delivering the actual information. So an expression like the point I wish to make is simply completely unnecessary. That doesn't deliver any relevant information. Just reduce these kind of phrases or expressions and directly say what is the point that you wish to make. So the point you wish to make is that employees working at this company are in need of a much better manager of their money. This second part is the point. Remove the first part and straight come to the point. Now, let's think about this one. The employees working at this company are in need of a much better manager of their money. Employees working at this company is redundant because they would not be employees at this company if they were not working there. So working there doesn't add any additional valuable information. A working employee is redundancy in itself. So just say employees at this company. It's delivering exactly the same information than employees working at this company. They are in need of something. Again, this is not action focused because the verb is to be, are, that is not an action. And the actual action or is the need. So just take the need as a normalization and turn it into the action, make it the verb. Employees need whatever, instead of employees are in need of whatever. And then a much better manager of their money, you could condense it and say just better money manager. Let's take a look at the second example. It is widely known that the engineers at Sandia Labs have become active participants in search and rescue operations in recent years. So again, like the first example, this sentence is not super long, it's not extremely complicated, but we can make it even shorter and even more clear. First, we have again a slow wind-up, an unnecessary expression that doesn't deliver any valuable information. We can just remove this and we can focus on the actual message. Engineers who are the doer and the subject, that's good. Engineers at Sandia Labs have become active participants in the search and rescue operations in the recent years. What is The verb, what is the action? The verb is have become. That is not the action that is going on in the sentence. The action is the participation in these operations. So the fact that they participate, this is what is going on, the participation. So take the participation, which is again a nominalization, and turn it into a verb. The verb of participation is to participate. So if you already have the active doer in the as the subject, that's good. And now say what they are doing. They are participating, not becoming participants. So instead, you can say engineers participate in the search and rescue operations. Or in this case, it took place in the past, so you say have participated in these operations. So compare this one with the second one. First one is, it is widely known that the engineers at Sandia Labs have become active participants in the search and rescue operations in recent years, versus in recent years, engineers at Sandia Labs have participated in the search and rescue operations. Shorter, straightforward, clearer, easier to understand. So clarity, our prime goal. We want to be as clear as possible. The reason I already mentioned it a little bit is because things that we describe in scientific writing, the science itself, very often can be complex and can be complicated. It can be difficult to understand. So if the actual content that we want to describe is already difficult to understand because of complexity, then at least what we can try is to make the language we use as simple and clear as possible, to not make it even more complicated to understand. The content is difficult, so make the language easy, simple. Because we want that the reader understand the message, right? We want them to understand this complex topic. Make it as clear as possible. I already mentioned there are many different ways and many aspects that can be considered, many different techniques that can be used to enhance clarity, to improve the clarity. The practical tip is ask yourself, what is the key message you want to deliver? Say it out loud as simple as possible so your own grandmother would understand it. So think about, what is the message you want to deliver? Simplify it. Try to deliver this message in the most simple way to your grandmother so she could understand it. So again, it's not about showing off using the most sophisticated, colorful language to sound very smart and like someone who really knows all the words and so on. No, the job is to deliver a message as clear as possible. The first aspect we can consider, it's not a technique, but the first aspect we should consider to make things more clear is to reduce ambiguity. We never want to be ambiguous. Ambiguous means that something can have two or even more meanings. If a word or a phrase can express more than one meaning, it's not clear anymore, right? Ambiguity, again, in other kinds of writing, in novels, it can be a very powerful technique to use stuff in ambiguous ways, so it's not so clear for the reader. It can make things very interesting. It can leave space or options for interpretations. It can be very, very interesting. For the sake of clarity in scientific writing, we don't want ambiguity. We want to use words that have only one meaning. So it's very clear. There is only one way to understand it. That helps to avoid misunderstanding. ambiguous way of writing can also be powerful to hide your true intentions. So someone is understanding it in one particular way, but actually you meant something different. Example number one, Bill is running. If you don't provide any context, Bill is running could mean running for presidency, if you're talking about Bill Clinton, or it could mean a boy called Bill is doing exercise, like running in the park. Running is ambiguous without context. It can mean different things. Without the context, you don't know what was meant here. The second example, which I like very much, because there are more than two ways to understand it, although it's only three words, is I saw bats. We have ambiguity in two of these words. Saw, which can mean, it can be a past tense of the verb to see. So I see something, I saw it in the past. And also bats is ambiguous because a bat can be this equipment in baseball that you use. It can also be an animal. So saw bats can mean that you now in the present saw a, a bat. It can mean that you saw in the past two bats, which can be animals. You saw the bats. It can mean that you saw the bats from baseball, or it can mean you saw, like cutting, sawing the bat from the baseball, or that you saw the animal. So this is ambiguity. I hope that you understand what ambiguity is and that you always want to avoid ambiguity. The next thing that is harmful for clarity is to use idioms. And again, idioms are very popular in other ways of writing because they are more engaging. They are easy to visualize them. So it makes for a more colorful reading experience. But the true meaning of idioms is not so clear, and it may depend on context. It may also depend on cultural background, how you understand them. The problem with with idioms is that their meaning is different than what the words literally mean. So you want to focus, you want to write stuff that the literal meaning is precise and clear. And you don't want to have a secondary meaning that is different than the literal meaning. Idioms make you sound more like a native speaker often. And if you do language exams, like if you take an English test or something, if it is an oral exam, people may even judge you based on how well you use idioms. But for scientific writing, don't use idioms. Like never ever is really bad. Because the true meaning may be unclear for people from different countries, for example, with different cultural background. One example of an idiom is cutting corners. So literally, cutting corners would mean that you take a tool that is able to cut, like a knife, and you have an object that has corners, like a table, and you cut the corners. That is the literal meaning of cutting corners. Obviously, that is not the meaning of the idiom, cutting corners, but what exactly is the meaning? That depends on the context. It's not so clear. It sometimes means that you take shortcuts to get to your destination more quickly. Sometimes it means that you increase the speed, or the pace of how things are done, that you drive fast and dangerously, for example. It can mean to do something in a poor way. So it's not faster, it's not leaving particular things, skipping them. It means to do all the things, maybe same pace, but putting less effort to save time or something, or to save money. It can also mean to force a solution that is not appropriate. All these things can be meant when you say, I cut corners. So you see, it's not so clear what exactly was meant, and certainly not the literal meaning. You never meant you took a knife and you were cutting corners somewhere. So I hope you understand what idioms are and why we don't want to use them, like really never ever in scientific writing. If you want to see more examples for idioms to get a better understanding what they are, you can check this link. I will share the slides later after the lecture. Okay, so this about idioms. We have another one, which is bad practice in scientific writing, euphemisms. Never use euphemisms. A euphemism is a mild or indirect substitution of an expression that is considered too harsh or unpleasant. So sometimes you talk about something that is harsh, unpleasant, is not a very comfortable topic, and then not saying it directly, clearly, but to substitute it, to replace it with other expressions that sound more mild, that are more indirect. It doesn't create these negative associations in the reader. That would be a euphemism. The problem with them is, again, they are not so clear because they don't directly say the fact. Very often they can be, or they can be used intentionally as deceitful, and they can be misleading. And instead, we want to be precise. We want to be direct and clear. And especially, whatever we write in science should not be influenced by socio-political do's and don'ts or rules. So political context, politically correct writing or phrasing should not affect how in science we write and precisely describe objectively the world. If we start writing under socio-political influence, we are not objectively, directly, clearly describing the world anymore, but we are describing within a framework, following rules, enforced or desired, it doesn't even matter, by society, by politics. Huge no-go, no-no. One example of a euphemism is collateral damage. You probably all know what collateral damage means, but it sounds much more pleasant than what it actually means: the destruction of property or the killing of innocent people, innocent civilians. So let's say if a politician must report to society the consequences of military actions, for example, and this person is talking about collateral damage, then you should know what is meant, and you should know how severe the consequences of this collateral damage could be. You don't know it exactly because it was not specified. It was just unclearly labeled as collateral damage. But this could mean it's not called just damage at the site. It means hundreds of people, women, children, whatever, in their homes were slaughtered. That is what it could mean. Okay, so euphemisms are rephrasing or describing stuff in a milder, indirect way, more pleasant, not so harsh. But it's not clear, it's not precise. And in scientific writing, you want to precisely, objectively describe observations and describe phenomena going on in the world. There are some very few exceptions where actually journal policies come into play, publishing policies. If a journal has strict rules, publishing rules, regarding how to describe minorities or affected people, then you have to follow those rules. Otherwise, you are not allowed to publish your article in this journal. And there are some journals or some topics where they want you to use particular phrases, where they ask you basically to use euphemisms. So that's the only exception. But anything else than this, never use euphemisms in scientific writing. Next one is about unclear pronoun references. This happens very, very easily. Pronouns like he, she, they, it, this, that, these, those, they are very convenient. They replace a previous noun or an entire previous statement. So that makes it shorter and easier. But also you already can understand, because it's previous nouns or statements, that sometimes it can not so clear then what the pronoun actually refers to. So use pronouns, of course, but only if the reference is clear. If it is clear to what noun this pronoun refers to or to what statement, and if it is the entire statement or particular nouns or one particular noun. It happens very easily that a pronoun, everything sounds clear for you because you had your idea in your mind, of course, and you write it down. But someone who doesn't have the idea and wants to grasp the idea, for this reader, there are multiple options to what this pronoun actually refers to. So be careful about this. Let's see this one example. With the spread of globalized capitalism, American universities increasingly follow a corporate fiscal model, tightening budgets and hiring temporary contract employees as teachers. Full stop. This has prompted faculty, blah, 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 and so on. This is the pronoun, but what does it refer to? It could refer to the entire statement, to this entire phenomenon going on that was described in the previous statement. It could refer to particularly the spread of globalized capitalism, or particularly to following a corporate fiscal model, or particular the outcome of it, tightening the budget and hiring contract employees. It's not clear what is meant by this. So use pronouns, you use them all the time, but check if it is for someone else who didn't understand your idea yet, if it is clear what you refer to. And we see it quite often in the context of this explains. That was observed also in another study, these kind of phrases. Be careful about those. Next one, avoid multiple negatives. Negative expressions are less direct and harder to understand. And especially if you use multiple of those in combination, very quickly it's getting difficult to understand what is actually meant. This example here is not the worst example. Two negatives, you can also say it's a good example. The first one, the bad example, less attention is paid to commercials that lack human interest stories than to other kinds of commercials. The second part, or the second option, how to phrase this differently, is more attention is paid to commercials with human interest stories than to other kind of commercials. It's the same message, Nothing changes about the meaning, but the first example uses two negative ways to express something, and the second example turns them around and uses positive ways to express the ideas. Less attention that lacks something, more attention to something with something. Avoid multiple negatives. Turn it into positive phrasing that's easier to understand. The next thing on my list was the use of abbreviations, which is also something you will probably do in your thesis, that there is typical terminology frequently used in your field, and this terminology consists of 2 or 3 or 4 separate words, and you want to use an abbreviation so you don't need to repeat all the 3, 4 words every time. If you used all these 3, 4 words, everything gets very long and messy to read. You replace it by just one abbreviation, can make things easier. It makes things shorter. If it is easy to understand, it's more simple, more clear. That is the purpose of abbreviations. But if you use too many abbreviations, it's not reader-friendly anymore. So that would be excessive use of abbreviations. And if you use abbreviations inappropriately, it's also bad and not reader-friendly. And inappropriate usage would be if you use or you create an abbreviation which is common in the field, but you use it for different words. So you use it for a different context. Then obviously it is misleading and confusing. If you use excessively and or inappropriately abbreviations, it is more harmful than useful. So always make sure that you use abbreviations only to make things easier and more reader-friendly and to be more useful than harmful. If a terminology is very, very short, it is not reader-unfriendly anyway. So you don't need an abbreviation for something that is already short. If you have a terminology consisting of only 2 words, most of the time, it is not very meaningful and helpful to use an abbreviation for it. Sometimes you can reduce the 2-word term to just use one of those words in subsequent usage. So in the beginning, you say, oh, this is a training intervention. And from then on, you refer to it all the time as the intervention. That is clear. It is one word, and there is no need to abbreviate anything. And even if you wanted to use an abbreviation for something like training intervention, for example, and then you would use TI, it's not reader friendly. TI is not a common abbreviation that everyone knows. You made it up based on the initials, the first letter of each of the single words. No one without this explanation knows what TI is. That means also throughout the rest of the manuscript, the reader needs to remember what it was because they are not familiar with it. And then reading TI doesn't make it more reader-friendly than reading training intervention because training intervention already is quite short. It's only 2 words. So use abbreviations for terminologies that are short already, and especially use it if the abbreviation would be uncommon, not common. Common abbreviations are in biomechanics, for example, the center of pressure, COP, or center of mass, COM, or center of gravity, COG. These kind of things are common, so they are easy to understand. The second bad example of use of abbreviations is if you use an abbreviation in a new context in a different context, but the abbreviation itself is common in a different context. So for example, labeling your intervention team or using an abbreviation for it as IT would be strongly not recommended. Do not do this, because IT is a common abbreviation for a very different concept, for a different idea. So then intervention team, just describe it differently, and maybe you want to use a different abbreviation then for this idea, if it is worth to use an abbreviation at all because it is short, but don't use an abbreviation that is common in a different context. In my experience, students like to use abbreviations where they are not necessary. Try to reword it, make the wording shorter so you don't even need an abbreviation. That is, in my opinion, the most reader-friendly way to do it. And only if things are necessarily long, then use an abbreviation. Or, of course, if it is already an established, well-known abbreviation, then it is also no problem. Everyone knows about it. Some rules about abbreviations is you need to explain them the first time you mention them. So in the text, the first time you use center of mass, add in brackets COM. So then it's established, and then throughout the rest of your manuscript, you can use COM, no further explanations. But you need to do this in each part of your manuscript again, and these parts that you should treat separately are the abstract, the full text, each figure and table. So that means if you use an abbreviation in the abstract, you need to explain it. You need to write the full wording of the abbreviation in the abstract the first time you mention. Then for the rest of the abstract, you can use COM, for example. The first time you use it in the full text, like in the full manuscript, you have to write center of mass, bracket, COM again. For the rest of the manuscript, you don't need to use it again. And for each figure and each table, you need to do this. The reason is because many readers may only read your abstract and not the full text. Or readers, if they decide they already know they are interested in your study, they skip the abstract, they want to read the entire full text anyway, so they start reading the full text. They don't even read the abstract, can also be happening. Or readers straight jump from method section or like understanding what you did, they jump straight into the results. They want to check some figures or tables, understand them. They need to know the abbreviation in order to understand the figure and table. That's why. So explain the abbreviation in each of these different sections, abstract, full text, and each figure and table. General rule is no abbreviations in the title. There are very few exceptions if it is about, for example, chemical structures, where otherwise it would be extremely long terminology, which is replaced by just a single letter or something. But that does not apply even if abbreviations are common in the field, something like center of mass. You should not abbreviate something like this in a title. So general rule, no abbreviations in the title. And general rule, avoid to use them in an abstract. At least try to. It must make a lot of sense and make things much easier to read to justify abbreviations in the abstract, which happens, and then it is good usage of abbreviations in an abstract, but try to avoid them. Try to find ways to not make them necessary. And very often they are not necessary and they are not worth it because an abstract is very short and an abbreviation in the abstract is only worth it if you repeat this terminology a number of times, which is not very likely because the abstract is very short. So within 200 or 200 words, the length of a typical abstract, it very often doesn't happen that you use the terminology center of mass more than 4 or 5 times. So if you use it only twice, let's say, you would have six, like the word count would be six, center of mass times two, you use it twice, compared to you use COM, you still need to explain it in the first at the first time of mentioning. That means you have center of mass, 3 words, then in brackets COM, your word count is already at 4. And then the next time you mention it, you use only the abbreviation COM. So you are at a word count of 5. So you introduced and you used an abbreviation, which in general makes things less reader friendly, just to save a single word, 5 versus 6. If you use this abbreviation 6, 7, 8 times in an abstract, then it will be worth it. But if you use this terminology only once, then in this case, it would not be worth it. So no abbreviations in general in titles and try to avoid them in the abstract.
The time.
We have a couple of some more rules, and yeah, we have a little bit time to go through 1 or 2 more. The consistent use of terminology. This is linked to the abbreviations, so we are dealing with specific terminology. Don't change terms throughout your manuscript that describe the same idea. As long as you described a certain idea, use specific terms for it and stick to these terms consistently throughout your manuscript. Why? Because that makes it easy to know what you're talking about. If you suddenly change the terminology for the same idea, for like you would use synonyms to describe the same concept, then it is not so clear for the reader, why do you use different words for it now? Do you use different words? Do you use synonyms because it is a different idea or because it's a different context? It seems like it. Otherwise, why would you use different words for it now? You can solve this uncertainty, this unclarity, by always sticking to the same terms for the same wording for the same idea. Again, in different writing, that would be different. Then it would be desirable to change wording, to use the language in a more versatile way. More diversity and variability in language usage would be desirable in other ways of writing. But since we want to be clear and easy and simple, the easiest way is to use the same term for the same ideas. Everything is clear then. So reducing repetition is considered good in other types of writing, but we choose the most precise words to deliver a specific meaning, to reflect a specific idea. That is our primary goal, not variety, not to make it more interesting in terms of language. No, simple, stupid, clear. And synonyms can cause confusion because it's not clear why you use different words now. The reader may think that you refer to a slightly different concept or a different context. In writing, in scientific writing, you sometimes need to be cautious with your statements, with your interpretations, with the conclusions you draw. So you do not want to speculate or overstate things. but in the same time, you want to make strong statements. Weak statements are not desired because they don't deliver a strong, meaningful idea anymore. So you want to make strong statements to the degree that is possible, given the evidence that your data allows for, or the evidence your data created. You need to express precisely the strength, the level of the evidence, and based on this, you can make your statements as strong as possible. People often in scientific writing tend to be too cautious, too careful, and that leads to statements being very vague and lacking actual value. If you are super cautious, there is nothing left that you actually say. So you can read stuff like apparently observed trends could perhaps indicate a potential chance of. All these things make the statement weaker. It's not certain that the trend appears. Apparently, there is this trend. It's not there is the trend, there could be a trend. You add perhaps, so again, it's not certain. It's only indicating something. It's not showing it. There is a potential, no certainty. And there is a chance. So again, no certainty. All of these marked yellow marked words are weakening the statement, the strength of your statement. Apparently, observed trends could perhaps indicate a potential chance, doesn't tell anything anymore. You can say this about almost everything without speculating. So yes, you're not speculating, but you're also not saying anything anymore. And it is good enough if you say something like, the observation may explain, or the findings suggest. That already tells that there is less than 100% certainty, that there is uncertainty, a degree of uncertainty. So you do not speculate, but at the given level of evidence, you are making a stronger statement then. So maybe you notice this also in daily life. If people are too cautious about what they say, they are actually saying nothing. Let's take a short look. I want to finish at the next slide. Yeah. I mentioned already to keep stuff simple and stupid. You remember this rule, remove everything that is not necessary, everything that is redundant. You want to make things shorter and easier to understand. And in terms of structure, so this not only affects wording, but also structure. The most simple structure is to have a subject and a verb, and then maybe complementing things like the object. So that would be a sentence where she, the active doer, smiled. That's the action. Very simple. Thank you for showcasing. Very good. So that's the simplest, the simplest sentence structure that we can have. It is always very easy to understand and very good. We can add additional information like objects or I participated is simple structure. I participated where? In a match. Okay. What kind of match? In a soccer match, and so on. But the structure itself is still very simple. It's just the amount of information that I add. That is very good, most simple. The second one, also still easy to understand, is called compound structure, is where basically you combine two simple structured sentences. She smiled and she laughed. Overall, this sentence is a little bit more complex. The single components are simple, but you have multiple components. Still okay, still good. The third level is complex sentence structure, where you have multiple ideas that are independent. An independent idea and a dependent idea in one sentence. For example, she smiles when she is happy. The one thing is describing what is going on. She smiles, that's the action. And the other idea is giving, in this case, a time framework. It gives a different sort of context to it. So that is not two simple actions put together. That is one action, and we focus on the primary things, but then we provide context or influences, something like this. This is making sentences more complex. This is also okay if the amount of information you add is not overwhelming. If you use complex sentence structures and a lot of information and many different sorts of information, then you would easily create sentences that are hard to understand and not following the keep it simple, stupid principle anymore. So down there you see this example. If you read through it, and I don't read it out now because reading my pronunciation, my breaks in how I read it would help you understand. But if you don't have this help, you just read the sentence for yourself and you try to understand. It is unnecessarily complicated for sure. Good. So in terms of structure and in terms of amount of information, in terms of usage of words, in terms of using abbreviations, all these things, you want to try to keep your writing style as simple as possible. You want the reader to have the easiest time possible to understand what you're saying. You cannot change how complicated the topic is that you talk about. Maybe your research field is something very difficult for other people to understand. You cannot change that, but you can change your language. And your language, your writing style should be as easy to understand, as simple, as clear, as precise, as objective as possible. Good. I think since the 2 hours are over, we hit a good time to wrap things up here. I will share the slides with you,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a lot of more content about writing. So I can share also more slides where you can just go through them on your own, and I think they are clear enough that the slides themselves can speak and deliver the message, the desired message, so you can understand and maybe hopefully can learn something from it. Should we stop here for now and have a little Q&A if some students have questions about what I delivered, or questions like what is important, or things they have read and didn't understand, stuff like this. If there are any questions, we can do.
Okay, thank you very much, Assistant Professor Dr. Philip X. Fuchs. So we have actually already so many questions in the Excel. Wait, I will show you. Okay. Or maybe anyone want question directly. You can raise your hand. No? Okay, here we have 75. And the question is about this. Maybe I can copy to the chat box from Inaya. Inaya, are you here? Inaya? Not yet. This is from Ina, yeah?
Okay. Okay. I read it out so everyone can know what we are talking about. The question is, what I understand is that writing a scientific paper requires many references to support the arguments we present. If we are writing a paper with very few references from previous journal articles, how can we formulate our arguments given the limitation of those references? I think we should address first a little bit why we need to references and what is the purpose of using them. We want to use reference to show that our thinking and our idea and our plan is based on previous evidence. That we don't just come up with whatever we may think is good, but that as much as possible, our entire idea is built on evidence. So, or in other words, to say what we state, what we write makes sense and is supported. The more evidence we have, the more support we have. So the more evidence, the more references and strong evidence from good references, the better is our argument that what we are doing is meaningful and makes sense. So we should always try to get the strongest evidence possible, which means good studies with suitable findings that align with our goals or our context, as possible. The only reason for not having other articles as in our references would be if there is no other research providing the evidence that we need to know. Um, that means if we are working in a field where there is not much investigated yet, we still need to refer to other areas that may give us helpful information, and this other field has some references. So if we are working in one field and there are no studies, we say we are interested in a specific topic, no one worked on this before, so we cannot reference anything, there are no studies, but we still need to justify why we work in this field and why we come to certain theories or hypotheses. We have research questions, we have hypotheses. How do we get to these hypotheses? What kind of information has led us to these hypotheses? There must be some other source of information that led us to this. Then we need to refer to these other contexts. So it never happens that there is nothing to refer or very little. Only the connection between our study and the references may vary. If it is a very unexplored field, we refer to things from other fields. So there should not be a limitation in references, just our focus on what we refer to may change. The second one is systematic literature review of current paper writing trends. Systematic literature review of current paper writing trends. How to have an efficient strategy in writing a good systematic literature review paper. For systematic literature reviews, there are very strict rules how to plan and implement them. There are guidelines like Prisma that should be followed because, first of all, it's the best practices. And second, because journals require them, they will not publish your stuff. Like many good journals will not accept submissions if you don't follow these specific guidelines. So check the guidelines for systematic literature reviews. Prisma is one popular of them among some others, and familiarize yourself with these guidelines and follow the guidelines. They provide in detail how to do literature review. Why is it essential to provide detailed descriptions of samples, procedures, and equipment in the methods section of a scientific article? What is the importance of a strong introduction in building a foundation for an academic article? Very good and very important question. Or questions, two different ones. So first one about the methods. Why is it so important to provide the detailed descriptions? And maybe also part of this question is implied, what is important to write? It is important to provide all the information that someone else who did not participate in your study and who has no idea about your study, so literally a reader, for example, can replicate your study, can copy your study. All this information is affecting the results section. And you need this information in order to interpret the results. All information that can influence the outcome of your measurement is relevant in context of making interpretations. And in the end, of course, the result alone do not matter, the interpretations, the meaning of the results matter. So you need to provide all details, all information that is necessary for someone else to replicate the same study, because all these things influence the outcomes, influence the results, and have an influence on the interpretation. If some of these crucial information is missing, another reader could see a result, but could come to different interpretations. This is what you should avoid. Or even more clear, if you miss essential information in methods, someone else could not replicate the study. So they basically don't know exactly what you did. If you don't provide the sampling frequency, someone else could not define the sampling frequency in their setup. So they cannot replicate. They can do it in a different sampling frequency. They can take any that they want, but that would influence the results. They would get different results simply because of sampling frequency. So the effect that they observe in the results would not be due to whatever was your research question, whatever you wanted to investigate, maybe the effect of skill level, the effect of gender, the effect of cultural background on performance, whatever, psychological pressure in performance. No, the effect was due to sampling frequency. So it is an important key information. All the information that is necessary to replicate the study and get the same outcome is necessary to describe in the methods. Why? Because of interpretation. And the second question was, what is the importance of a strong introduction in building a foundation for an academic article? Also really, really important, important question. The background, the foundation is important because this is what leads to the research questions. The background, the foundation, is the justification of the research question. If you make errors in the information you collect about the background, your research question is not well justified. In the worst case, that could mean that someone else who reads your background and he has more information or better understanding of the topic, he would say, well, this research question is not necessary. We know these things already in different studies, or different studies that you didn't mention in the introduction section. They are giving us information that tell us we should actually be interested in something different. Something different is way more important. It matters much more, or it is much unclearer what to do with it. So these are the things that should be investigated, not the research questions you were asking. So in the worst case of a weak introduction with inappropriate literature review, inappropriate elaboration on your topic, you would come to research questions that are irrelevant, uh, inappropriate questions, questions that have been already solved or partially being solved, application context that is unsuitable, all these kind of things. So I would say it is even maybe the most important part of a study to make sure you do a good and proper literature review and understand your topic to derive meaningful, good research questions at the end of your introduction. What research methods should be applied to make research enjoyable in physical education and sports? Oh, enjoyable for whom? For the researcher or for the people who want to apply them? Um,
Readers.
Maybe both. For the researcher, it's not about being enjoyable, of course. It's about answering questions, doing what you are capable of doing, choosing the right methods. So for the researcher, it's about choosing the suitable methods. Suitable means being the right ones to answer the research questions. So the methods must align with the research questions. You must pick study designs, like overall design. You must pick protocols. You must pick statistics that will create results that help answer the research questions. That is the right approach for research methods for the researchers. Enjoyable is important for practical application, maybe. So if you generate findings that are supposed to be used and applied by practitioners, for example, maybe your research is about how to educate in physical education, or how to train coaches, or developing training methods that should be applied by coaches, or athletes are following certain regimes that are more beneficial than others, then joy comes into play. That is the only thing I can think of. And then it is maybe a point of consideration to choose protocols, designs that are more feasible in practice, that are less demanding, less taxing for athletes also. All these things make it more practical. And joy is it is an influence on how likely it is whether people are implementing it or not. How can we check if the language that we use is clear and not ambiguous? Yeah, okay. So ambiguity is only one part of clarity or contributing to clarity. Whether something is ambiguous or not, you need to know the language, of course, a little bit. You need to have awareness of multiple meanings of words. Attention and awareness. Try to read your things, your work, your text from a different perspective, and try to check if it makes sense what you wrote if you read it at a different time, if you read it with having a different idea in your mind, let other people read it, like let other people proofread it. Everyone has a different background, and these different backgrounds may help to identify ambiguity. But very often or soon, when you start paying attention on ambiguity, you identify patterns or you identify certain phrases that are always at risk of ambiguity. So you learn to identify ambiguity over time. And for clarity, making things as simple as possible and focusing on the action. I think these are the two most important things, which you can objectively check. Like you can check, is the verb an action verb? Or is the verb to be, for example? So is the focus in your sentence and the way how you grammatically structure it, is it focusing on the action? Is the verb describing the action? And the second part was, is the subject, the grammatical subject, actually the personal thing that is doing the action? You can check these things, and these things will already help a lot in terms of clarity. The practical thing you can do is you can check if other people understand what you mean. Other people, including people from outside of the field, like your grandmother. What methods and suggestion should authors take to increase the chances of scientific work being accepted in reputable journals? Um, that is not that is hard to generalize because the methods depend on the field and on the topic, on the questions. But if I can generalize something, methods should be sharp and on point, address the research questions. Having this strong link between research questions and methods. And they should generate data that allow for explanations of any effects. And these effects should be only due to the effect you aimed to observe. You have a research question, which may be, for example, let's say there is an effect, there is a difference between male and female performance. So you collect data from males and females. Now, the methods are good if the data that you collect and the way how you collect them really allow you to assess the difference between females and males. And the methods are good if there is only one explanation for the effects, and this explanation is only gender or sex. As soon as your methods allowed for other interpretations, it's not so good anymore. So let's say if I tested my female sample and my male sample during different days, and maybe something happened on these days that affected performance, then I suddenly have a second possible explanation. I observed differences in my female and between my female and male sample, but now I don't know anymore. Is it because they were females and the other one were males, or is it because it happened during different days and this had an effect on performance? Or other example, maybe females and males systematically had different food on that day. And maybe the food affected performance. So it was not because of male, not because of the sex. It was because of the food. Or maybe they systematically had different sleeping patterns or different working environments. Because in the male sample, the males, 90% of them had a job and 40% of that was freelancing, and females there were 20% housekeepers and 80% were working, and among the workers there were only 10% freelancing and 90% of those were employed. And maybe the kind of work or employment had an effect on performance. So then again, the effect you observed maybe was not only due to sex, but because of other factors. Bottom line here is methods are good if the methods allow for only one possible explanation of the effects. And this explanation should be the thing that you wanted to investigate. In my example, it was sex and nothing else. As soon as other people can come up with other explanations that are reasonable and possible based on your methods, you increase the uncertainty of your statements. It could be because of this effect, it could be because of another effect that I didn't want to investigate, but I couldn't avoid it. So general rule for good methods, addressing specifically the questions in a way that it allows only one question, namely the one explanation, namely the one that you wanted to investigate. How do you overcome language barriers when writing scientific papers in English? Well, there is no way around improving your language proficiency. That means reading a lot, with high awareness, like paying attention on how things are phrased, how things are worded. I think if you focus on one particular field of research, there are certain common ways of phrasing and certain terminology and so on. So you can learn and improve quite quickly within one particular field. That is also why I can write well as a non-native speaker in my particular field. But for example, if we talk about other stuff where I'm not familiar with different topics, my level of writing would also decrease. But within one field, don't feel too frustrated. You have to learn by reading, by paying attention, by getting feedback from other people when you write. There is no way around these things, but you can progress relatively fast. Feedback can also be from chatbots, for example. Like you can write something, you can try your best to follow the principles regarding style and so on, focusing on the action, having the active doer as a subject, all these things, removing redundancy. And then you ask ChatGPT and so on. I write a scientific text. My language style should be concise, simple, short, reader-friendly, precise, objective, whatever. All these things specified. Please revise and improve the text according to these style requirements and to see what ChatGPT is doing. And sometimes it finds a way of rearranging, rephrasing, rewording stuff in a way that is even shorter, even more clear. And then you can learn from this. It's also some sort of feedback. How to make articles that are interesting and easy to understand in finding information for readers. Easy to understand in terms of language, all these things we talked about, making it simple and clear. Interesting in terms of language by introducing variability in how you structure sentences, in terms of sentence length, in terms of wording also, but only if it really is different concepts. As I said, for the same concept, use the same words, the same terminologies. Interesting, to make things interesting in terms of topic, I think stuff that many people are involved in or stuff that affects many people is interesting for many people. Things with huge consequences is interesting. So if consequences are huge, it is more interesting for people. Let's say you find something and well, it makes people feel better for 1 second after they wake up. Maybe that's not a really huge impact and it's not really interesting for many people. But if what you find out changes their mood over the entire day and helps people to get out of depression or something like this, it is a huge consequence. So people will be interested in huge consequences. Also interesting is application orientation. And this is also something journals want more and more. to know and to display how your findings can be applied. It is interesting for the reader, obviously, because then it's not only at a theoretical level, oh, yes, it's interesting to understand how this works or what you can observe in reality, but also how to gain benefit from it, how to make use of it, how to get an edge as a coach or as an athlete, and so on. So application orientation also makes things interesting, I guess. What are the main steps for a beginner to be able to write scientific papers so that it is accessible and sustainable? Not exactly sure what is meant by accessible and sustainable.
Maybe
Um,
for easy and always continue to writing because this is the beginner. So sometimes one to writing is difficult. So how to step make easier to writing and she or he can continuously to writing like that.
okay, okay. Um, I think what I mentioned in the beginning a little bit, this outline approach is making things easier, and it is a good way to start. Because everyone can do an outline. It's just about how detailed the outline is, how correct or how valuable the selection of information is. All these things will define the quality of the final work. But for everyone, it's possible to do an outline, to outline their thoughts, their thinking. And it is fast, it is easy, it doesn't take a lot of time commitment. So you have 20 minutes only. You can start doing an outline, and then you can come back and you can continue with the outline later or the next day, adding more details to the outline. So it is a very friendly way to set up the start of your work. Um, and this process, I think it is helpful to develop well-structured text to develop the skills that you need to write well-structured text. And if you use this and experience that it can be easy to start writing and that you get a good result in terms of structure, even if the content itself is not the highest level in the beginning, of course, but the structure is good and you see the success, that could contribute to a sustainable joy doing it this way because you see the success. So I would recommend spending time on thinking, structuring your thoughts, using outlines as a writing strategy to begin. It makes it easy. It gives you success in terms of structuring, and the success will make it more sustainable for you because then you actually enjoy writing.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much, Assistant Professor Dr. Philip X. Fuchs. Alhamdulillah, finally, the lesson for today done. So give applause for Professor Dr. Phillips. And
Thank you very much.
this is very good. Still, before we have 84 participants, and now we still have 58%. Wow. Proud of you for the participants who's still in here, who's still attending the lecture from Assistant Professor Dr. Phillips. Would you please to taking picture to improvement that we already have casing lecture? Please open your camera, and that is very clear, right? Very clear the lesson today. And please open the camera and keep smile, Phillips. I want to see your smile. all of you, please. Yeah. Maybe anyone want help me to taking picture also? Wait. Slide one. are Santis. Good. Slide 1. We're going to slide 2. Where is, oh, no person opened the camera. What happened? The slide 2. Just only 2%. What happened with slide 2? And slide 3. Oh, no one. Okay. Slide 3. Okay. Alhamdulillah. Rabbil Alamin. The agenda today is finally finished for today. But next day we'll have maybe we have the Philips usually have 2 times, and we're waiting for the Philip have 3 times. So thank you very much, Assistant Professor Dr. Philip X. Fuchs. Your sharing your knowledge is very helpful for us and insight for us to writing more scientific paper. Okay, thank you very much, and let's close this this lecture today with the words Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Okay, thank
Thank
you.
thank you very much for everyone's
Thank
attendance. Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You, Philip. Philip, do you remember Professor Setia Rahayu?
I don't see. I don't see
Yeah, I
right now.
see in there.
Ah, yeah. Now I see. Yes.
Yeah,
Hello.
that's good.
Nice to see you.
Thank you very much for sharing knowledge in my student.
How have you been doing the last semester, since the last time we saw?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't hear. I don't hear.
Okay, Professor Setia Rahayu now not anymore to be coordinator program of PE department for Magister. Now she is a professor in sports science department. Before we have usually have a conduct guest lecture, right? For PE in Magister, physical education at Magister,
Now
and also for doctoral program.
already for my
Yeah, now she is the former. Okay, Phillips, thank you.
Well,
So,
congratulations.
have you been in there? Is it good? Now,
Everything very good, but we had strong typhoon like 2 weeks ago,
yeah.
and in when was it? Not too long ago, we had a very strong earthquake in Hualien. So a little bit difficult for some people in Taiwan.
Yeah, hopefully everything safely.
But they are used to it, and they are good in managing these natural disasters and fixing stuff, and the safety is really good. Like the constructions, it's crazy. Like, I think this earthquake was the strongest since 25 years, and only 2 people died. It's of course very sad and unfortunate for those 2 people and the families and so on, but still I think it's crazy when you see how strong the nature is and what happens, and it's crazy that not more happened. It's insane.
Yeah, sorry to hear that. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you
so
very much. Philip.
we are
See you
lucky
again.
that
Yeah.
we are fine and we
Mhm,
had the session.
mhm.
Please let me know about whether we do a second session or not this semester.
Yeah, you
And
do the
yeah,
second section when you have a time. So before December.
Okay, okay, good.
So you
Uh,
on the end of October
in
or the
in uh, in the second half of November, so
mm,
in one month, or in December, because the next 3 weeks are very busy for me.
okay. So we see the time, the date, so make it the fixed date first when you're able. So I think on
Mhm.
12 until 20 I cannot. So in
We
the
we
second,
can we can we can check via email or message and
okay,
arrange what is the best time for both of us.
okay, that's good. Thank you very much, Billy.
Good. Okay.
Always happy
Wonderful.
and happy.
Then thank you very much for having me. I hope you enjoy a wonderful afternoon and see you then soon in whenever we find the time.
See you. Actually, they miss you. They are your student in here, all your student.
Wonderful. So many more
Yeah,
students than in Taiwan.
yeah. They already miss you. And actually, they want to meet you in person, but because of administration and so many so on, not yet come here.
Good.
Okay.
Then I'm glad to see you soon.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Tachian. See you
Thank
soon.
you. Bye bye.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi
warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh.
wabarakatuh.
Shisheni. Bye bye.
Thank you, Mister. Thank you, Mas.
Jadi,
Yo Rahayu.
Thank you.
Terima kasih.
halo,
Assalamualaikum, Prof.
Mr. Warno, Yuda.
Sehat, Prof.
Ini mahasiswa S3 Bu Didi,
Eh,
Bapak Ibu. Ya,
terima
masih
kasih.
Terima kasih, panitia. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Bu Titin. Ngapunten disambi-sambil akhir.
Terima kasih. Eh, mungkin besok Bapak Ibu kalau pengen AE itu biasanya bisa menggunakan AI itu loh ya. Bisa pakai bahasa Inggris di Indonesia kan. Di Zoom-nya itu kan masing-masing ada. Nah, ada toolnya itu. Nanti pilih pakai bahasanya Indonesia. Nanti bisa biasanya.
Langsung di menu ya.
Ah, ah. Nanti kan
Berarti Inggris langsung Indonesia ya.
kayaknya ya. Ya semoga bisa semua mudah ya untuk dimengerti. Kebetulan beliau juga banyak publikasinya dan sangat jelas untuk menjelaskan. Oke, terima kasih matur nuwun sangat. Silahkan kembali Bapak Ibu ke aktivitas masing-masing dan semoga kegiatan hari ini yang kita lakukan mendapatkan berkah
Amin.
manfaat juga dari negeri. Assalamualaikum
Amin ya Rabbal
warahmatullahi
Alamin.
wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih.
Iya.
Kesantan.
In.
Pensiun jadi presiden Jokowi uang diajak kampanye pas